Well, good morning, everyone. My name is Adam, and I'm the park interpreter here in Whiteshell Provincial Park. The Whiteshell is located on Treaty 3 territory. That's the traditional land of the Anishinaabe, Cree, and Métis Nation. Now, I want to thank everybody for listening to me this morning because we are going to clear up some myths and misconceptions about a very important animal to us, bats. Now, for myself personally, bats have really always been some form of, in my life in some form or another, whether from the mythological part or from real bats around in my life. I think for how my first Halloween, I went as a vampire. Batman was and still is my favorite superhero. And my earliest memory in life is actually my father catching a little brown bat in our cottage. Thankfully, I remember that and not my mother's reaction to it. However, I am told the only thing he said to her was, "Don't put on your glasses." Now, we don't all need to have warm and fuzzy memories of bats like I do, but we definitely need to view them in a positive light, especially for us here in Manitoba. Bats, for a long period of time, have been used as scapegoats. And because of this, they've gotten kind of a bad rap, and it's time to change that. Bats are a very important part of the food web. They serve us in more ways than one. And by understanding how they help us literally on a day-to-day basis, we can see now how important it is to help these little critters on to the next generation. Now, before we get too far into things, the first thing I actually need is something from you guys watching at home. I'm going to throw this online poll up in just a second because I need to know how many of you watching today either like bats, maybe are afraid of bats, or just generally don't like bats. Bear with me one moment here. So we'll let this go for just a second. For those of you that maybe want to put up, are you afraid of bats? A yes. Don't worry, A, it's anonymous, and B, lots of people around the world are still afraid of bats. There's actually a technical term for it called chirotophobia, which we'll talk about a little bit later on in the presentation. So let's see what our survey says. Alrighty, so that is not a bad reaction. Not a lot of people are scared of them, and a couple people are, which is all right. Sorry, we'll take a look at that right there. Over 80% saying no, so that is perfect. So again, it is okay for some people to be afraid of bats. Like I said, lots of people are scared of bats all over the world. And unfortunately, a lot of those fears come from myths, misconceptions, and inaccurate portrayals in stories and folklore. And without a doubt, the most common myth or fictional characters to rise from bats is, of course, vampires. And even the character Count Dracula. One of the interesting things about vampires and Count Dracula is that the origin of them actually had nothing to do with bats. The origin of the fictional characters of vampires and Count Dracula was actually spawned from a Wallachian ruler over in Europe in the 1400s known as Vlad Tepes. His other name was also Vlad Dracula. Now, those names may not ring any bells in our head watching today, but you may have heard him by his more commonly known name, Vlad the Impaler. I'll let you guys research at home how he got that fancy nickname. But that's actually where the vampire myths and the character Count Dracula came from. Bats weren't even associated with vampires until about the 16th century. That's when the vampire bats that we know today were first discovered in Central and South America. And they were named vampire bats because they do drink blood, like the mythical characters vampires. Further writings like Bram Stoker's Dracula further associated bats with vampires, but we can see that bats actually had nothing to do with the original vampire myth coming about. Now, not all stories of bats over the years are portrayed in a negative aspect. Sometimes they're actually in a positive light. In ancient Egypt, for example, bats were thought to cure many ailments such as blindness, baldness, toothaches, a variety of other things as well. Bats even appear in a number of Ojibwe stories, which the Anishinaabe are a part of, where the bat is often portrayed as a trickster type character. Now, like I said, I want everybody in Manitoba to have a positive attitude toward bats. And one of the reasons I think that some people may be a little bit afraid of bats is maybe they've seen really, scary, grotesque pictures, really close up of, a bat's, say, angry face, where it might look a little scary. So an easy way to clear that up is right now I'm going to show you every single bat that we have in Manitoba and shed a little more light into how they survive in Manitoba, not just in summer, but also in winter. So let's take a look at all the different bats that we have right now. There we are. So bats are found all over the world, pretty much except for Antarctica. Now, in total, approximately 1,300 species of bats are known to us today. This makes bats the second most common group of mammals in the world after rodents. Now, they range in size from the bumblebee bat, shown here, which is the smallest bat in the world and found in Thailand, all the way up to the flying fox that we see here. This is the largest bat in the world, found in Southeast Asia. This bat has a 5-foot wingspan, which, by the way, is the same as a Canada goose. Manitoba has 6 species of bats. The largest is the hoary bat, shown right here. This bat migrates south in the winter and has a wingspan of almost 20 inches. So that's just about 2 feet. Next, we have the eastern red bat. This bat also migrates for the winter and has a wingspan of about 13 inches. This here is the silver-haired bat. This is our last migratory bat that we have in Manitoba. It's got a wingspan of about 11 inches. And you can see by the hair on the back, that's kind of where he gets his name from. Next, we have the northern long-eared bat. Taking a look at the ears, we can see clearly where that name comes. Now, this is our first hibernating bat and has a wingspan of about 10 inches. The big brown bat here also hibernates through the winter. And as the name implies, this is one of Manitoba's larger bats with a wingspan of about 17 inches. And lastly here, we have the little brown bat. This is the most common bat species in Manitoba. If you've seen a bat in our province, chances are it was a little brown bat. This bat hibernates through the winter and has a 10 to 12 inch wingspan. Now that we've seen what all of the different bats in Manitoba look like, we can see clearly that we really shouldn't be scared of them based on their appearance. Quite frankly, I think they all look kind of cute. Now, at the beginning, I had mentioned that the fear of bats is called chirotophobia. Now, this comes from the Greek, meaning hand and wing. Now, one of the big misconceptions about bats is that they're actually flying rodents. This, of course, isn't true. If we take a look at the skeletal structure of a bat's wing, we can see that it's actually really a very uniquely formed hand with a membrane of skin between each finger, which forms the wing. This makes bats the only mammal that can truly fly. This is just one thing that makes them unique. Another is how they are able to maneuver at night. All Manitoba bats are nocturnal, meaning they're active at night. Common phrase I'm sure everyone's heard is blind as a bat. Bats are indeed not blind. In fact, they can see about as well as us. Which raises the question, if we can't see very well at night, then how can a bat see at night? Bats use a technique also used by dolphins and whales called echolocation. The bat lets out a high-pitched peep kind of sound, and that sound wave bounces off whatever's in front of them and travels back to the bat. So this is how they can maneuver at night. So now that we've got a little bit of an insight into the types of bats that we literally have in our backyard, as well as how they survive in Manitoba, we can see that they are unique critters. But now for the fun part, how bats actually help us. There's a lot of different ways. I've highlighted just a couple of my favorites. For starters, in Manitoba, all 6 bat species that we have are insectivores. That's a fancy word meaning they only eat insects. You can see the fondness of bats starting to rise already. Now, they don't just eat bugs that are pesky to us. They will also eat insects that will prey upon farmers' crops and can actually act as a natural pesticide and can save us really a lot of money. Take our next online poll to see if you can figure out how much money bats account for as a natural pesticide. So let's take a look. Is it in the millions of dollars or the billions of dollars? In either case, it's quite a lot of money. Give everybody just a little bit of time here to see. Trust me, the answer is actually going to probably startle you. Alrighty, so let's take a look and share our results here. So that is very interesting. Believe it or not, the answer is 6 billion. There are certain places, and actually 6 billion is on the lower end too. There's places in the United States that have estimated that insect-eating bats actually account for about $6 to $36 billion worth of natural pesticide. So in these tough economic times that some of us are living in right now, bats are literally saving us billions of dollars on our food. That's a great reason to like them right there. But in keeping with them being insectivores, insect-eating bats, with summer on the way, I'm sure one thing that all of us are not looking forward to is mosquitoes. Now, full disclaimer before I start bashing mosquitoes. Mosquitoes are an important part of the food web. They help pollinate lots of important plants, and they serve as a very important food source for things like bats. Now, this little guy right here is our little brown bat. Showed you a picture of him just a moment ago. So again, the most common bat species in Manitoba. If you're not a fan of bats right now, you're going to be in about 30 seconds. This little brown bat can eat up to 600 mosquitoes in one night. Just for that reason alone, we should all love bats. But with my third example here, it gets even better. Not only do bats eat a lot of mosquitoes, so we don't have to do this 600 more times in the summer, they also save billions of dollars with farmers' crops, but in a very special place, a very special bat pollinates a very special plant. Down in Mexico, it's the long-nosed bat pollinates the agave plant. Now, for those of you that are unaware, the agave plant is the plant that is used to make tequila. Just for each of those examples on their own, clearly bats are very an important animal. But when combined, we could see that a world without bats would actually be a very, very different world. Now, unfortunately, if the invasive disease white nose syndrome has its way, that could be a world that we may have to live in. Now, if any of you haven't heard of what white nose syndrome is, I'm going to show you real quick exactly what it is. So bear with me for one more second here. Now, white nose syndrome is a fungal disease that was brought over to North America from Europe accidentally. This disease attacks the bat's nervous system and can eventually cause a white crusty substance to build up on the wing, rendering them unable to fly. It also builds up around the muzzle and nose area, which gives the disease its name. Hibernating bats afflicted with white nose syndrome can wake up in the middle of winter. Now, this will cause them to starve to death as there is no food source for them. The scarring of the wing tissue is also a death sentence, as a bat that can't fly is basically like a deer that can't walk. White nose syndrome is spread among bats from direct bat-to-bat contact, as well as bats coming into contact with guano from an infected bat. Guano is bat poop. So for example, a bat pup falling from its mother in a cave into infected guano will infect the mother if the pup can find its way back up. Now, white nose syndrome was first detected in North America in New York State in 2006. And since then, as you can see here, it has spread throughout North America, including Manitoba, where it was discovered in 2018. Much of the spread has been from bats hibernating in large numbers, like we see here, as well as migratory bats transporting the disease during migration. However, humans have also played a part in the spread. White nose syndrome is thought to have been brought to North America from people touring caves in Europe, walking through infected guano unknowingly, returning home to North America, and touring through other caves at home with the infected guano still on their shoes. It's also thought that humans can unknowingly transport infected bats from one area to another. Now that explains this discovery in Washington here. It's thought that people using an RV or camper unknowingly transported an infected bat that was roosting in their camper. Now, since its discovery in 2006, white nose syndrome has caused the deaths of over 15 million bats in North America. This equates to a rough population decline of about 70 to 90%. It's the biggest mammal population decline in recorded history. And just for a bit of comparison, 15 million is approximately half the human population of Canada. Clearly, bats have been unfairly persecuted all throughout time, while at the same time helping us out with lots of different things. Just some of the examples I gave a few moments ago. It's time to change the bad rap that bats have gotten over time, and mainly by stopping the spread of white nose syndrome. Now, there's a lot of easy things that we can all do at home right now to help our Manitoba bats out. One thing is that we could participate in the Neighborhood Bat Watch program. So this is a citizen science-based program similar to a lot of bird surveys that are out there, like the Christmas bird count and the schoolyard blitz. Similar thing, but just for bats. You can record any bat sightings that you see and enter them into that site, and scientists can get to that information from a national database. You can also, and this is one thing that I have done many times in my yard, is install one of these. So this is a bat box. Basically, it's a birdhouse for bats. Very simple, easy thing to do. You just have it like this, and you attach it up onto a pole or side of a building if there's no other place. And the bats will hopefully fly up and use these rivets here, climb up, and get access up in there. So bat boxes are great to have in your yard for a couple of reasons. For starters, with having bats in your yard, you can drastically reduce the number of mosquitoes. There's a win right there. But you can also help stop the spread of white nose syndrome. The way this works is that the chances of only about maybe 20 or 30 bats at most will use one individual box. So the chances of one of those 20 bats having white nose syndrome is a lot smaller than in some of those huge caves where they can have sometimes tens and maybe even hundreds of thousands of bats. Just one bat with white nose syndrome in there can spread it through that entire cave very quickly. So the chances of 1 in 20 bats here is a lot smaller than 1 in 10,000 bats having white nose syndrome there. And you're also providing habitat for a very important animal like we identified earlier. For information about the Neighborhood Bat Watch program, as well as tips for installing a bat box, visit batwatch.ca. Now for our camping crowd, before you take off and leave a campground this coming summer, When you're packing up, make sure you inspect your camper or RV thoroughly to make sure there's no roosting bats anywhere. This will prevent you from potentially transporting infected bats from one area to another. And lastly, one of the easiest things, in a couple of weeks or in a couple of months when our bats start reemerging again, just sit outside with your family in your backyard in the evening. Whether you live in the city or the country, or maybe the summer comes, you're out camping, just sit around in the evening, looking up at the sky, watching for bats. You might be pleasantly surprised at how many bats are actually around, which is a good thing, especially if you put up some bat boxes in the next couple of weeks. And like I said, bats have been very unfairly persecuted all throughout time, and it is time to change that. They need a good rap, not a bad rap. As we've seen, bats are not only very important to the food web, but they're also very important to us. And by understanding how these bats help us literally on a day-to-day basis, it becomes very obvious to see why we need to help these little critters survive on to the next generation. So I want to thank you all very much for joining me this morning to learn a little bit about bats. And now, if you haven't done so already, if you have any questions, please type them into the Q&A box down there, and I will do my best to try and answer as many as I can. Or if we have no questions, as it seems to be going right now, then again, I want to thank you all very much for listening to me this morning. And I just want to remind everybody that if you do visit Manitoba parks or any provincial parks, to follow COVID-19 public health orders. And I just saw one question pop up, or a few are coming in now, so let's take a look here. So let's see. So Val has a question here. Where are the bat caves in Manitoba and where are they protected? So some of the caves that were found that white nose syndrome was discovered in was in and around the Interlake region. Now, as far as are they protected or not, I will have to look into that. One of the things with white nose syndrome is we haven't really had it in Manitoba very long. So I'll have to double check and see if they are protected. I do know just from my own personal experience, cave exploring or spelunking, as it is called, don't even know why I know that, isn't really as common in Manitoba. I'm sure it happens, but I myself have never been in Manitoba. I'd have to double check on that. We have Doug asking here, what was the address for the bat boxes? The address that I had given was batwatch.ca. That is a good place for some tips for installing your bat box. As far as building your own, I'm sure if you didn't before, everybody now with COVID the last year probably has a Pinterest account. Just search do-it-yourself bat box designs and you will get an endless list of all different kinds if you want to build one yourself. If you're not quite as handy but you still want a bat box in your yard, pretty much anywhere you can buy a birdhouse or bird food, you can get a bat box there as well. But the website was batwatch.ca. Val asks again, what kinds of bats use bat boxes? For the most part, all of them. Basically, as long as the bat can get in, then they will use it. And a good rule of thumb for bats is pretty much if they can get their head in something, they can get their entire body in something. So people may think that, you know, this little slit down here isn't very big. Again, as long as the bat can get its head in there, it can get itself in there. So Susan asks, do you have to clean the bat boxes yearly? Like with birdhouses or any type of small animal habitat you're going to put up, it definitely wouldn't be a bad idea to clean it on a yearly basis. Another good tip to do is when you're out inspecting it, first off, don't inspect it too much because that might dissuade bats from wanting to go in there. But if you haven't had any action or any evidence of bats in there, after about 2 years, try moving it to a different location. But yeah, cleaning it out however you can, whether by taking it apart or just by emptying it out, that's a good idea on a yearly basis. So here's a good one. Joan is asking, I've always heard that bats like to fly into your hair, and that's why I've been afraid of them. Is that true? For the most part, no. I have heard stories as I go out through the park in the summer talking to people about bats. Usually, one or two people will say, "Oh, I've had a bat fly in my hair before." One of the common things with bats is a lot of times they're actually mistaken for moths. We have a couple of big moths in Manitoba, like the polyphemus moth. It's a big brown moth like this that are very active at night. And when you see wings coming at you like that, a lot of people's first assumption is it's a bat, it's a bat. A lot more often, it's probably a moth. For the most part, no, bats will not fly into your hair. And I used to have actually very long hair as a kid, so I can attest I've never had a bat fly into my hair. Lauren is asking, is it okay to set up bat boxes at whiteshell campgrounds for seasonal sites? Yes, it is. We encourage everybody to put them up where you can, either on your property or in campsites themselves. The one thing that may be important is as you're leaving for the end of the season, a good idea would be to take it down and take it with you. For the most part, we don't think the bats will actually use these to hibernate in over the winter because they're very exposed to the elements. And for hibernating, bats do actually like to stay in big, big numbers because their collective body heat is one of the things that will help keep the area and themselves from freezing in the winter. Shyla is asking, how can I attract bats to my yard? So the best way is, again, to put up at least one or, if you have a big enough yard, multiple sources of these bat boxes here. Another good tip for if you're putting them up, not only keeping them 2 meters off the ground, but ideally you'd want to have them on some kind of metal pole, or at the very least not in trees. Trees are actually not a good place to install these. For starters, the branches, depending on how they're arranged, may make it a little more difficult for bats to get to it. Plus, these being up in trees is also makes them very easily accessible for a lot of their predators. Things like martens or a lot of other tree-dwelling predators can make it very easy now to get at those bats, which is kind of counterproductive. Okay, so Megan is asking, been waiting for bats in my bat box. Not sure how successful I'll be in downtown Brandon. Do we have urban bat populations? Yes, we do have urban bat populations. So like I had said at the end, a great thing to do is just go outside in the evening. Not right now. The bats are starting to wake up from hibernation, or our migrating ones haven't really started coming back up yet. Maybe in the next week or so. Just sit around in your backyard and look up in the sky in the evening and see how many are around. But there are definitely urban populations of bats. Absolutely. All right, and that looks like all of our questions there. So with that, again, I want to thank you all very much for listening to me. And I hope you guys do at least one or multiple of those things that I suggested at the end to help out our Manitoba bats. But lastly, just once again, when you do visit Manitoba provincial parks, be sure to follow COVID-19 public health orders. With that, I want to thank you all one last time for listening to me this morning, and enjoy the rest of your weekend.